Today we're going to talk about security and orchestration for heterogeneous network. And we've spent the conference talking about the different platforms and different technologies that the network is now built on. And I wanted to talk a little more about that. My name is Malevich. I'm Director of Product Marketing for Tufin. And today I want to introduce you to Bill. Bill is a security administrator. Bill is managing security across Palo Alto, Panorama, Cisco, VMware NSX, and recently AWS. Bill has to manage all these different technologies, and he feels like he's losing control over network security, and he needs help. So let's talk a little bit more about the heterogeneous network. A few years ago, most data centers were physical. Okay, we had a physical network with Cisco, Juniper, Checkpoint, others, and the InfoSec teams had to manage zones and subnets in order to make sure that the network was protected. Then came next generation firewalls, right? And all of you are here because you're using or thinking about using next generation firewalls. So there's another aspect to the security policy. There's applications, there's users, there's more complexity to the security policies that you manage. Then came the software-defined data center, right? With the expectations of productivity from the business, expectations for agility. A lot of companies adopted the software-defined data center, and with that, the software-defined network. And then there's a need to manage microsegmentation, right? The perimeter has moved or has shifted, like we heard in the opening session. And there is also a need to manage segmentation within the data center, within your virtual data center. So this adds to the complexity of what you're already managing. Now, a lot of DevOps teams are also using public cloud, right? A lot of applications, VMs coming up in public cloud, again, for better agility provided to the business. And the security teams are expected to manage the security aspects, right? The responsibility for the public cloud is shared between the public cloud vendor and the security team. So the security team has to be also aware of security groups and how to manage security groups for the different VMs and the different applications. And if that's not enough, there are a lot of applications today that span across these different technologies, these different platforms. So I can have an application that is in public cloud, but I have my application server and my database in the virtual database, the virtual data center. So how do I manage security and connectivity for that application? So let's have a quick show of hands. How many of you manage security and connectivity across more than one management system? Okay, so a lot of you. So there's a challenge with that. There's a challenge of knowing exactly what's going on in between all these different platforms. So let's look at those challenges. The first one is complexity. And we talked about that. There's multiple platforms, multiple vendors, a lot of management systems. It's very difficult to understand what exactly is allowed or blocked on each of these systems. And for public cloud, there's even limited visibility just to know which VMs and applications were set up. Now add to that the constant change, and there are changes all the time. New applications that are coming up. The business requires agility from IT in order to make sure that that all new applications are up and running in a very rapid aspect. And there's also a need to manage all these changes, because if you don't manage the changes, if these changes are happening ad hoc, or if you're using, say, an orchestrator for the specific change, just to run the change without any audit and control for that change, then the change can introduce risks to your network. Okay? All these changes and complexity bring in a challenge of cybersecurity that can put your network in jeopardy, because there may be some overlooked gaps of access that a cyber attacker can try to exploit. So with all of this, with all the complexity and change, you have to make sure that you're still protecting the network, that you're not opening access that is not required, that you're not creating the gap that the next attack will try to exploit. But with the security, there's also need for connectivity. Okay? We can't have security blocking business revenues. That's not going to happen. There's a need to maintain security, but you have to make sure that you're providing the right agility for the business. So connectivity must be maintained. You can't break an application in order to secure the network. Okay? And applications require connectivity, and that's often a balance between connectivity and security. And last but not least, there's a compliance challenge. So a lot of companies have to comply with either industry regulations, or it could be internal best practices. And you have to not just enforce these standards, you also have to prove that you're enforcing them. So you need either reports or some type of documentation to show that you are indeed enforcing this compliance. So to take a closer look at these challenges, we recently ran a survey with Enterprise Strategy Group, ESG. And of course, we found that cloud adoption is imminent. That wasn't a surprise for us. We found that 69% of respondents said they had private cloud in production. And 49% of respondents implemented SDN, software-defined networks. And 65% of respondents were using public cloud significantly. So there was no surprise with these numbers. We knew that cloud adoption was imminent. I think the surprise was when we found out that most organizations will have more than one platform. So most organizations are using hybrid cloud, not just private or public, and they're using multiple platforms. They're using AWS and Azure, or they're using OpenStack and VMware NSX. So there's a lot of platforms that you need you need visibility and control for. We also found out in the survey that infosecurity teams are not prepared to secure the cloud infrastructure. So 69% of respondents agreed that they are still learning how to apply security policies in the cloud. Okay, that's worrying. 62% agreed that they find it difficult to get the same level of visibility in cloud as they do with physical networks. Of course. The public cloud is a lot of times not owned by the security or network teams, so maybe they didn't get the memo of a new VM or a new application that was just set up. And 56% agreed that it was difficult to audit network security controls in the cloud environments. Poor Bill. There's a heavy impact for all of these challenges of the heterogeneous networks. First of all, he's facing growing exposure to cyber threats. Okay? He's not sure how everything is protected. He feels like there's a lot of chance to use the new cloud platforms in order to try and launch a successful cyber attack. And he also doesn't feel like he has the right visibility and control to these new platforms that he's managing. He's tasked with managing the security, but he doesn't always have the visibility that he needs in order to do that. And again, like they said in the opening session, you can't secure what you can't see. Of course, there's also a risk of non-compliance, and we all know that there are significant penalties for that. If you can't prove compliance, either because you were too busy with other things in order to pass the audit, or because you didn't have the right visibility you needed and the right reporting in order to prove compliance, then you're facing some consequences. And just for the daily changes, there's a challenge on how to manage these changes. On premises, usually these changes are manual, so they take some time. So on the cloud, everything is happening everything is very dynamic, but when you need to make a change to your either physical or virtual data center, it might take some time because you have to understand exactly what you need to change, maybe go through a security check, make sure that everything is audited, so it could take time. And on the other hand, in the cloud, changes are happening ad hoc. There's just changes happening all the time. As soon as a VM is up, it's added to a security group, and a lot of times you lack the audit and control that you need for these changes. So what is Bill going to do? He's confused. He needs a solution for these challenges. So first of all, he's mapping exactly what he needs. And he needs a single console that will allow him to manage security and connectivity across the systems so that he doesn't have to manage security and connectivity in Palo Alto Panorama, and then with Cisco, and then with AWS. He needs a single console for that, okay? That single console needs to give him the right visibility and control to all platforms, so not just Panorama, where he can see everything and he controls everything, but also for AWS and NSX and all the other platforms that he's using. He needs the single console to reduce the attack surface, so to ensure that he is in compliance with a baseline security policy and with the regulations and standards that he needs to comply with. And finally, he also needs to implement changes in minutes. So he needs to fulfill those expectations of productivity and agility from the business. So he needs to implement the changes very fast. So he mapped his needs. Now he wants to take a closer look at what that means. The single pane of glass, a single console, what does that mean? It means a way to abstract the security policies from all the different platforms, right? So we said Palo Alto Panorama, Cisco ASA, Cisco routers, AWS, and VMware NSX. And if he, in the future, if he wants to also use Microsoft Azure and OpenStack, he would like to have those supported as well. So he needs this abstraction layer in order to be able to view and control all the security policies. And he wants to see them modeled a certain way. So he doesn't have to figure out how to work with security groups and then how to work with microsegmentation and how to work with next generation policies. He wants everything to be modeled the same way so that it's easy for him to understand and control it. In addition to the security policies that he wants to control, he also wants to control connectivity. To control connectivity, he needs to pull in routing information from all these platforms, from all of his routers and switches, and build a topology simulation for his network. This is the way to manage connectivity across platforms. If I know exactly what my topology is, I can run a path analysis that will go across my software-defined data center and the public cloud. Okay? So I can know exactly what is the connectivity status, and I can troubleshoot connectivity across these systems. So in this example, if you look at the PowerPoint, you see a path, okay? And the path goes across AWS, Palo Alto, Cisco ASA, and the Cisco router, okay? And for every point on the path, I can see whether the policy is allowing or blocking traffic. Okay? I am checking this path for a specific service, or in this case any, but I can check it for a specific service. And I can tell, you can tell on the left-hand side, you have either a little red icon or a little green one to say whether or not policy is allowing access. So it's very easy to troubleshoot connectivity. If suddenly something is not working, I can see immediately where my traffic is blocked, and I can change that. Okay? I can enable connectivity across systems, okay? Not just for a single system. So I have the visibility, I have the abstraction layer for security and for connectivity. Now what do I do with it? I want to reduce the attack surface and ensure continuous compliance. So I need a baseline security policy. an enterprise-wide policy that says what is allowed and blocked between my security zones. Okay, I have security zones on the axis, okay, and each cell in the matrix will say whether traffic should be allowed or blocked. This is not for a specific device. This is for the entire enterprise, okay? This is my security policy. This is what I want to comply with in order to make sure that I'm not providing access for potential attacks. So I can use this to strengthen my security posture, okay? I can use this to help make sure that security is maintained, but I can also use this to ensure compliance, because if you can see in the drill down, okay, there's a way to say whether access between these security zones needs to have a comment, or whether you allow any or not, or what is the permissiveness level that you allow for this rule. So how many IPs do I allow in source or destination? So the granularity here allows you to also ensure compliance with specific regulations, either PCI, SOX, NERC, and others. And this is not just used to find violations in your existing policy. You can also use it moving forward for every change that you want to make. So every change I want to make, I can check against this matrix to see whether or not it's introducing potential violations. And I can make a decision based on that, on whether I want to make the change, whether it needs to go into any kind of a security approval process, or if I want to add an exception, a periodic exception that will expire in 3 months. For continuous compliance, I also have to make sure I maintain an audit trail. And the audit trail needs to, again, go across vendors and platforms. I need to make sure I capture all the changes. Who made these changes? Were they part of the change window or outside the change window? Is this change allowed or not? And specifically, in Palo Alto, for example, drill down into the rule profiles, okay? The security profiles for each rule, because that's something it's very important for me to know if someone has changed the vulnerability profile of a rule, for example. So I need to know that. I need to know who made the change, when they made the change, and I need a full audit trail for all of my systems. Now that I have security and compliance, it is time to take care of agility, right? We talked about agility. You can't have security blocking agility, so I need to make sure that changes are made in minutes. How can I make sure of that? I can build a workflow. I can build a workflow that can be completely automated. That workflow can have embedded security and compliance in it. So like we said, every change will be examined against the security policy. And when that workflow is automated and all changes are made from that workflow, then changes will happen in minutes, very short time. So let's look at the process, for example. A sample process, okay? This is just an example. Of course, every organization will have a different process, different guidelines on what the process should look like, what type of approval levels are required. But in this example, the change ticket can come from different sources. It can come from a ticketing system. If organizations are using Remedy or ServiceNow, that's the standard change process. It's not, you can't use a different system. That is the ticketing system that the organization has standardized on, and that's what we're going to continue using. So the ticket will either come from one of those systems. The ticket can come from a portal, a user portal. Okay, so some service providers may want tickets to come from a user portal, or it can come from a higher level of abstraction, from a change in an application. So if I have an application connectivity model and I want to make changes to that application, like add load balancing, or I want to mirror the application to another data center, or anything that I want to do with the application, I can also drive a change from that. So once the change request is in the system, we can check it against the security and compliance standards. Okay? Is this change violating my security policy? If the answer is yes, then it either has to go through approval, I can add an exception for it, or I can reject it altogether. If someone opened a change for HTTP access, you probably want to reject it and tell them to open the access for HTTPS. So you can do that. Or you can add an exception that will expire, okay? And then it will expire in 3 months, and someone will have to request this access again. But there are different ways to manage that in order to make sure that security and compliance are built into the process, okay? I want to make sure of that because I don't want to make ad hoc changes that might undermine my security standards. After I know that this change is legit or it has been approved, I can design it. Now, Bill, when he needs to design a change today, he has to first understand which devices the change has to go through, okay? So which devices are in the path. He needs to understand whether or not this is implemented on a specific device, and if it's not implemented, how to implement it. And it takes him a long time to do that. If there's an automated mechanism that can identify the right policies and the right changes to make, that will make Bill's life a lot easier. So you remember the topology map that I showed earlier with the path analysis? This is where we would use that. This is where Bill would leverage that path analysis to say, I know which devices are in that path. I also know which devices are blocking traffic today. So I can tell what changes need to be made. So again, it will be an automatic way to get that information based on the topology simulation. After you know what the changes are that need to be made, it would be great if the system could also push them, right? Have the system push the changes for me. This way, it reduces complexity because I don't have to go to different systems to make the change, and it reduces the chances of human error. Because if someone is designing the change and someone else is implementing it, it sometimes doesn't look exactly the same. So I want to make sure that the implementation is completely aligned with the change design, and the way to do that is to automate it. And finally, you need a way to audit the change. So there needs to be a complete audit mechanism to make sure that changes were made based on what was requested, that they were that they went through the right approval process, and that they go into the system to be documented and authorized. So this is what I need for my change automation. And if I can automate all the steps and automate each step in itself, I can make changes really, really fast. Okay? I can skip approvals for changes that don't have violations, and it will go completely automatic. And the changes that do have violations will just go through approval and then will be implemented automatically. The last thing that was bothering Bill was visibility into public cloud. He wasn't exactly sure how he could control security when VMs were just set up overnight, and he wasn't always aware of that. So he needs an automated mechanism that will discover everything that's happening on the public cloud. He needs to understand which VMs were set up, what applications were set up, what type of tags these VMs have, and what are the security groups that each VM belongs to. So he needs to get all that information, and he needs to be able to manage it. And there has to be an automated way to do that, okay? Because no one is going to send him an email for every VM that's set up. So there better be an automated way to see that. And after he gets the visibility, once he has the map for the application to know exactly which VMs this application is using and what is the connectivity between them, he also needs to be able to change that, okay? If the VM is now part of the wrong security group, or it has to be part of another security group, then he needs to be able to make that change from the system. Once again, in order to make sure that there are no human errors and that the change is made automatically. So Bill knows what type of solution he needs. Now he has to go and find it. When he finds that solution that addresses these things, these challenges and these functions that he identified, then he will be able to manage security and connectivity across the heterogeneous network, so across all of his platforms. He will be able to enforce security and compliance. He will also be able to automate all his network security changes, right, with the process that we saw. And finally, he will be able to orchestrate application connectivity because he can get all the application information from his public cloud and from all of his other platforms. So to summarize, what we talked about today were the challenges of heterogeneous networks and how to maximize agility and security across the heterogeneous network. And the way to do that is with network security policy orchestration. What network security policy orchestration gives you is, first of all, visibility and control for all your platforms, okay? And most of you answered that you are managing more than one system. It will give you a way to reduce the attack surface, so to strengthen security and to ensure continuous compliance, because you have a central view, central control for all of your systems. And because you have an automated process, you can implement changes in minutes instead of days. So if we check on Bill, Bill is now orchestrating network security policies across all of its platforms, Palo Alto, Cisco, NSX, and AWS. Bill is smart. Be like Bill. If you want to discuss this further, then there's a discussion panel for Ignite that you're welcome to look at. And I will now take any questions that you have. Yes? Wait, I think there's a microphone that should be on its way.
So saying Bill now has to deal with a slightly different world. His applications have adopted this continuous integration, continuous development lifecycle, so they keep changing every 2 to 3 weeks when their sprints come out. And so their security posture keeps continuously being updated. And the challenge here is that not only do you have to know what their current security posture is, but their evolving security posture. Part of that has to come back to the application owners actually having visibility to their application and what the network is doing to it. Does Tufin or anyone out there in the vendor space has that ability to say what is really happening to this application? Latency, I mean, you're talking, that was a perfect example. You had AWS and you had maybe the application living somewhere else. But how do you see your SLA being provided to that application? How do you deal with continuous change to security posture and bringing that visibility back so that it's no longer just Bill that has this problem? It's shared across the entire environment.
So that's a great question. There are at least 2 vendors that can address that need, and Tufin is one of them. So we have an application connectivity modeling product, okay, that allows you to also manage the application. And it doesn't have to be the security administrator. It can be someone from DevOps. We have customers where the application owners are the ones who are logging in and looking at the information, or even getting alerts from that system, so they don't have to log in. But they will be able to know what has changed with the application. There's complete history of what is changing as well. And of course, there's connectivity troubleshooting for the application. There's a way to add load balancing, for example. Even if in F5 you added a load balancer, you can see that in real time for the application. So you can see that change, you can see that that happened. I think your question had another part to it of what happens if the application needs to change the security policy baseline. And that's something that has to go through the security team. So you can't make that change without the security team knowing about it and making that change. So the application owner will request the change. They can say, I need this for revenues, I need this to enable the business, and it will be approved with an exception. And if it's something that that you keep using and you keep renewing every 3 months, then the security team needs to make a change to the baseline. But it has to happen between these teams. It's not one team and it's not the other. There has to be collaboration between the teams, and for that collaboration, Tufin has we call it the Secure App. That's the product, and Secure App enables you to view and manage application connectivity across the different systems. Thank you for the great question. Any other questions? Okay. If you have questions, I'm still going to stay here for a while. There's no session after us, so we can stay. And thank you very much again for joining this last breakout session. Thank you.